Welcome back to Golo Nightmare. Tonight's story is called The Security Tape from Orchard Mall Was Cut Before the Screaming Started. At Orchard Mall, the lights went out, but the cameras kept recording. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, and turn off the lights. Wear your headphones, and listen carefully. The label is written in my handwriting, and I don't remember writing it. I keep it in my shirt pocket now, folded twice so I can feel it against my chest when I start to doubt myself. It's a strip of masking tape, the kind we used for the old reels, and across it in black marker it says, ATRIUM 034 do not run past 4, the letters are mine. I've compared them to my own paychecks, to the grocery lists in my truck, to the back of a photograph I carry that I won't talk about yet. It's my hand, there's no question. And I know I never wrote it because I've never worked the ATRIUM camera, and I have never in my life used the phrase do not run past 4. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and if I get ahead of myself I'll lose the thread. And the thread is the only thing keeping me here at this table, instead of out in that building. So let me start where a person is supposed to start. Let me start with why I took the job, because if you understand that, you'll understand everything else, and you'll understand why I didn't quit the first night I should have. 3 years ago, I lost my daughter. I won't use the word that everyone wants me to use, because that word means a body, and there was never a body. There was a mall, a different mall, in a different town on a Saturday in October, and there was a sale on at the store she liked, and she was 15 and she wanted to look at things by herself the way 15-year-olds do. I told her I'd be on the bench by the fountain. I told her 90 minutes, and I sat on that bench, and I looked down at my phone, and I want to be honest about exactly how long I looked down, because I've measured it 1,000 times since. 90 seconds, maybe less. There was a text from my brother about nothing, about a football game, and I answered it. And when I looked up, the entrance to her store was just a doorway with people I didn't know moving through it, and she was not one of them, and she was never one of them again. The police pulled the footage. There was a camera over that wing, and it should have shown her coming out or not coming out, or being taken, or walking off on her own, anything, any single frame of what happened. And there was a gap, 4 seconds. The detective showed me almost apologetic about it, like he was embarrassed for the machine. The time code jumped. One moment the corridor is full and ordinary, and the next moment it's 4 seconds later and she's simply not in the part of it where she should be. They said it was a known fault with that model of recorder, that it dropped frames under load, that it didn't mean anything. 4 seconds. The exact length of time I'd have needed to look up and catch her. The exact length of the thing I didn't do. So when I saw the listing for an overnight security contract at a mall that was being torn down, a place with no shoppers and no shifts and nobody to fail, I applied the same day. I think I wanted to be alone with monitors. I think some sick part of me wanted to spend my nights doing the one thing I hadn't done that afternoon, which was watch. Just watch, keep my eyes up, never look down, as if I could earn it back one empty hallway at a time. The place was called Orchard Mall, out on the county road past Halloway, and it had been dying since before the recession finished it off in 2009. Most of it was sealed now, plywood over the storefronts, chain link across the wings, but the central spine still had emergency power, and the security office still ran, and there was a single escalator near the old food court that nobody had ever gotten around to shutting off. The job, as it was explained to me, was simple. Walk the rounds, watch the cameras, and before the demolition crews came in the spring, work my way through the archive room and destroy the old surveillance tapes. The company didn't want decades of footage sitting in a building that was about to become rubble and lawsuits. So my real job, the one nobody put in the posting, was to feed the past into an incinerator one reel at a time until there was nothing left to find. I should have heard something in that, I didn't. The first night I drove out under a sky the color of a bruise and parked in a lot built for 2,000 cars with 9 spaces painted for handicap that nobody would ever use again. The main entrance was a row of glass doors, and behind them the mall opened up into a kind of canyon. 2 levels and a vaulted skylight gone gray with grime, and in the center a fountain, drained dry as a riverbed, but the coins were still in it, thousands of them, going green. Every one of them a wish somebody made when this place was alive, all of them just sitting there in the dust waiting for water that was never coming. Back I stood over that fountain for a long time on the first night. I don't know why. I think I was looking for a quarter I might have thrown myself, in another life, in another mall, with my daughter's hand in mine. The directory was still mounted by the entrance, a big backlit map, except the backlight was dead. You are here, it said with a little arrow, and around the arrow a grid of stores with names like Ghosts, a shoe place, a place that sold only candles, a pretzel stand by the food court that I could smell, I swear to God. even though it had been gone for 15 years. Cut grass and warm sugar. That's what the pretzel stand used to smell like. The dough and the salt, and somewhere underneath it something green. Like a lawn in summer, though there was no lawn within a mile of that building. I told myself it was the cleaning chemicals. I told myself a lot of things that first week. The security office was on the lower level, behind a door marked authorized personnel, and inside it was warmer than the rest of the mall, and it smelled like old coffee and electronics. A wall of monitors, most of them showing static or black, a few of them showing the live feeds that still worked. The atrium, the food court, the loading dock, the escalator that wouldn't quit. There was a desk with a logbook, a two-way radio on a charger, and a metal door at the back that led to the archive room, and past that to a smaller room with the incinerator. An industrial thing, gas-fed, with a chute and a heavy latch and a sticker on the side warning you not to put aerosols inside. Somebody had made a joke of that sticker years ago, drawn a little face on it. I'd come to be grateful for that little face. It was the only thing in that building that ever seemed glad to see me. The routine settled fast the way routines do when you're a man with nothing else. I'd arrive at 11. I'd do a walk of the spine with my flashlight, checking the chain link, rattling the plywood, making sure no kids had broken in to drink or worse. Then I'd come back to the office and watch the monitors, and between rounds I'd work the archive. The procedure was written on a laminated card taped to the desk, and the procedure had exactly one rule that mattered, and the rule was this. Anything in the destroy bin gets logged by real number, then incinerated, and nothing in the destroy bin gets watched. That's it. Log it. Burn it. Sign the line. You don't put the tape in a deck. You don't play it back. You don't get curious. The company's reasoning, I assumed, was liability. If you never look, you never see anything you'd have to testify about later. I was good at not looking. I'd had practice. The supervisor who hired me was a man named Reyes. Daytime only. I'd see him maybe 20 minutes at the start of my shift while he wrapped up his, and he was a warm enough guy, soft-spoken, always tired around the eyes. He'd ask how I was sleeping, which I thought was strange to ask a man who worked nights, and he'd sign off on my timesheet and head home to a family I imagined he had. There was also a voice on the radio, a dispatcher who answered to control, and I never met him in person, never knew his name, but he'd come on the two-way at odd hours to confirm my rounds. "Spine clear, Marcus," he'd say, and I'd say spine clear, and he'd say copy, and that was the whole of our friendship for a while. It was Reyes who first made me feel the floor tilt, though it was so small I let it go. End of my first week, he handed me my timesheet to initial, and there were 6 shifts on it. I'd worked 5, I said so. I said, "Reyes, I started Monday, this has me down for Sunday too." And he looked at the sheet, and he looked at me, and something passed over his face, quick, like a cloud over a field, and then he smiled and said the office must in front. Loaded me a day, payroll's always a mess at the start. Don't worry about it, take the money. And I took the money because I needed the money, and because I was tired, and because a man who's lost what I've lost learns not to argue with small mercies. But I remember thinking, as I walked out into the gray morning, that I'd never told Reyes which day I started, he'd just known. The first wrong tape came in my 3rd week. I was working the destroy bin, which was a gray plastic crate on a cart, and the company would fill it during the day with whatever reels they'd pulled from the archive shelves, and I'd empty it overnight. Mostly it was the boring stuff, parking lot feeds, stockroom feeds, hours and hours of nothing. The reels were the old kind magnetic tape in plastic shells, each one labeled by hand on a strip of masking tape. Camera number, date, time block. I'd log the number, carry it to the incinerator, drop it down the chute, latch it, hit the gas. I'd done maybe 400 of them by then without a flicker of feeling, but this one stopped me because of the label. The label said ATRIUM 03-14, and under that a date. The date was wrong. I don't mean it was old, I mean it didn't exist. It gave a day in a month that doesn't have that many days. February the 31st, I stood there holding it, turning it over, and the thing that bothered me most wasn't the date, it was the handwriting, because the handwriting was small and square and slanted slightly left, and it looked, even then before I understood anything, like it could have been mine. I told myself a hand-labeled reel from 20 years ago was bound to have a typo. Somebody writing fast at the end of a shift, putting down the wrong number. The ATRIUM camera was one of the few still running live, but it had been running for decades, so of course there'd be old reels of it. February the 31st was just a slip of the pen. Log it, burn it, sign the line. That's all I had to do. And I want you to understand that I almost did. I had it over the chute, my thumb was on the latch, and then I thought about the gap, the 4 seconds, the fault in the machine that ate my daughter, that the detective apologized for. And I thought, with a clarity that scared me, that I had spent 3 years wishing I could see what a camera didn't record, and here I was, paid to destroy footage without watching it, and I was about to drop another 4 seconds of somebody's life into a fire just because a card told me to, and I couldn't. I just couldn't. I carried it back to the office, and I put it in the deck, and I pressed play. The atrium came up on the monitor, but it wasn't the atrium I walked through every night. This atrium was alive. The skylight overhead was clean and bright, daylight pouring down even though the time code in the corner read 03:14 in the morning. The fountain ran. Water arsed and fell and threw light around, and there were coins going in, hands tossing them, and there were people, crowds of them. Shoppers with bags, kids on the edge of the fountain, a couple arguing near a bench, a security guard, not me, leaning against a pillar with his arms crossed. Stores that had been dark for 15 years had their lights on, their grates up, mannequins in the windows wearing clothes from a decade I recognized from my own youth. It was the mall, fully and impossibly awake, in the middle of a night that had a date that didn't exist, and the smell came up out of the monitor. I know how that sounds, a smell from a screen, but it did. Cut grass and warm sugar, the pretzel stand, the lawn that wasn't there, and underneath it, I swear, the exact air of that October Saturday 3 years ago, the air I'd breathed on a bench while my daughter walked away from me forever. My eyes stung. My hands went cold. I leaned in close to the screen, the way I never let myself lean toward anything anymore, and I watched the crowd move, and I started, God help me, to look for her face. The time code climbed, 03:13:55, and at 03:13:56 the screen went to static. Just like that, mid-motion. A woman was lifting a child onto the fountain edge, and then she was snow, gray snow, hissing nothing. I waited for it to come back. It didn't. The reel ran another 2 minutes of pure static and then stopped. I rewound it, I played it again. Same thing. The bright dead mall, the smell, the crowd, and then at exactly 03:13:56 the cut. 4 seconds before the time code would have reached 03:44 seconds. The number on the label, the number from the worst afternoon of my life. I told myself it was tape damage. That's a real thing. Magnetic tape degrades, a section gets wiped, you get dropout, you get static. I told myself the daylight was a recording error, some kind of exposure fault, the camera baked by years of sun through that skylight. The crowd, I had no explanation for the crowd, so I decided the reel was simply much older than its impossible date, footage from when the mall was alive, and somebody had relabeled it as a prank. The demolition crew maybe, bored men who'd heard the night guard was a sad case and wanted to spook him. That last one I really leaned on the crew. It had to be the crew, but that night doing my rounds I heard the sound for the first time. I was on the upper level near the sealed wing, flashlight out, and from somewhere below me down by the fountain I heard a small plastic ticking. Tick, 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 like the hard tip of a shoelace, the little plastic part tapping against tile. The sound a kid makes dragging an untied shoe. I stopped. I held my breath. It came again closer, then stopped, and when I shone the light down into the atrium there was nothing there but the dry fountain, and the green coins in the dark. So I went back to the office, and I took that reel, and I carried it to the incinerator, and I dropped it down the chute, and I latched it, and I burned it. I watched the little face on the warning sticker while it burned. I logged it. Reel number, then a line, then my signature, and I felt better. I'd looked, which I'd needed to do, and now it was gone, which I needed more. I told myself it was over. 2 nights later, it was back in the bin. The same reel. ATRIUM 3-4 and February the 31st in my handwriting. I knew it was the same one because I'd marked the shell with my thumbnail before I burned it. A little crescent gouge near the spindle, the kind of thing you do without thinking. And there was the crescent, right where I'd put it. I sat down on the floor of the archive room with that reel in my lap, and I made myself breathe. Tapes don't come back from a fire. I had burned this. I had logged it. And then I opened the logbook to check, to prove to myself I'd burned it, and I found the line. There was my entry. Reel number, the date, my signature, and the ink was still wet. I touched it. It smeared under my finger, a burn I'd done 2 nights ago. Logged in ink that hadn't dried. I sat there with blue ink on my fingertip, and I understood, in a small animal way before my mind would say it out loud, that something about time in that building did not run the way it ran outside. I started searching for proof I was sane after that. The previous guard had a locker in the back, still tagged with his name, Penn, and Reyes had told me on my first day that Penn had transferred to another property and never came back for his things. I'd left the locker alone out of respect. Now I cut the cheap padlock with bolt cutters from the maintenance closet, and I opened it, and inside there was a jacket, a thermos, and a notebook. A spiral notebook, the cover soft with handling, and I opened it, and I want to tell you what it felt like to read it, but I don't think I have the words. It was my handwriting, small, square, slanting left. Penn had written, page after page in my hand, and the things he'd written were the things I'd been thinking. the fountain coins, the smell of grass and sugar, the reel that came back, the ink that wouldn't dry. He'd written in my letters, "The cut is not damage, the cut is on purpose." And underneath that, "Do not run past 4." And underneath that, a phrase I hadn't heard yet but would. A phrase that's been living in the bottom of my stomach ever since I read it that night. He'd written, "We cut it for you." And the notebook ended mid-sentence, in the middle of a word, the pen trailing off across the page and down off the edge like a man's hand had simply stopped being there. I told myself Pen and I had similar handwriting, people do. Two men taught cursive by the same kind of teacher in the same kind of school. I told myself that. I am telling you all the things I told myself so that you'll understand I was not a fool. I was a man defending himself, one rationalization at a time, against something that was patient enough to wait for me to run out of them. I went back to the ATRIUM reel, because of course I did. Because I'd seen something in the crowd that second time I watched it and I hadn't let myself name it, and now I couldn't stop. There was a figure near the fountain off to the right, a girl slim in a denim jacket. She was facing away from the camera, always in every replay facing the fountain, and her hair was the color my daughter's hair had been, and on her left foot her shoelace was untied. The little plastic tip of it hung loose against the tile. And every time the reel ran, that girl was a few feet closer to the edge of the frame, closer to the right, closer to the spot where the static came, as if each time I watched she was walking slowly over many viewings toward the cut. I knew it wasn't Dana. I knew that. The footage was decades old, recorded before she was born. The clothes were from the wrong era. It could not be her. But grief is not a thing that respects what you know. Grief is a hunger, and it had been starving in me for 3 years. And here was something that wore her hair and dragged her kind of untied shoe, and was always about to turn around. I started watching the reel every night. I'd do my rounds fast, careless, and I'd come back and sit in the dark and run that bright dead mall and watch the girl get closer to the edge. And I'd lean in at 03:55 and beg her out loud to turn around before the cut. She never did. The static always took her first. It was around then that control changed. I called him one night near 4 in the morning because I needed a human voice and the radio was the only one I had. I keyed it and I said, "Control, you copy." And he came back, "Go ahead, Marcus," and I don't know what I meant to say. I think I meant to ask him about Penn, about the reels, about whether anyone had ever reported anything strange at Orchard. But before I could, he spoke again, and what he said was, "The cut is not damage. The cut is on purpose. Do not run past 4 word for word Penn's notebook." My handwriting, read back to me in a stranger's voice over a two-way radio at 4 in the morning in an empty building. I dropped the radio. I heard it hit the desk and I heard Control keep talking, calm, even. "Spine clear, Marcus," confirms spine clear, like nothing had happened, like he was reading from a card he'd read 1,000 times. And I understood then that the warnings in that building were not warnings. They were a script. Somebody had written it, and everybody, Reyes, Control, Penn, was just saying their lines. And the only question that mattered was whether the somebody who wrote it was somebody I knew. I think any sane man quits there. I want that on the record. A sane man drives home at dawn and never comes back and lets them tear the place down with all its ghosts inside. But I wasn't sane, not in the way that protects you. I was a father who had spent 3 years staring at 4 seconds he never got to see, and now I was inside a machine that did nothing but cut footage 4 seconds short. And there was a girl in that footage who dragged her shoe and wouldn't turn around, and every cell in my body had decided that if I could just see past the cut, just once, just the 4 seconds, I would understand what the camera at the other mall hadn't shown me. I would finally know what happened in the gap. I would finally get to look up. So I started mapping it. I pulled every ATRIUM reel I could find on the archive shelves, dozens of them, all different impossible dates, and I logged where each one cut, and they all cut at the same frame. 03:36, every single one. Different days, different crowds, different light, but the same exact moment of static 4 seconds before a timestamp that none of them ever reached. And then I noticed the thing that broke the last of me, the thing I still can't make my mind hold for very long. The cut came before the timecode said it should. I'd freeze the static and step back 1 frame, and the timecode would read 03:156, and I'd step back another, and it would read 03355, and forward into the static, and it would read 03354. The numbers ran backward into the cut, as though time in that footage was not flowing toward the missing moment, but away from it, as though 03:14 was not a point the recording failed to reach, but a place the recording was fleeing, and the static was not an absence, but a wall, built 4 seconds early, to keep whatever lived at 03:14 from ever reaching the person watching. The cut wasn't a malfunction, the cut was a barrier, and barriers are built by someone. Someone had stood between every viewer and the thing at 0314 and said, "You don't get to see this, I won't let you," and had cut the tape to make it so, over and over for decades for me. I found the editing bay on a night I almost didn't go into the back at all. There was a door in the archive room I'd taken for a supply closet, and it wasn't. It was a small room with a flatbed editor in it, a splicing block, reels of blank leader, a film bin with a velvet bag underneath to catch the strips, and a single bare bulb. There was dust on everything, but the dust was disturbed. There were clean places, the shape of forearms on the bench, the shape of fingertips on the splicer, where someone had worked and worked recently and worked often. And on the wall above the bench, on a nail, hung a coil of magnetic tape, 4 seconds of it maybe by the look, just hanging there waiting. I knew without being told that it was what had been cut out, the 4 seconds. The thing passed 4. Somebody had removed it from the reel and hung it on a nail like a coat. And here is where I made the choice I'll spend whatever's left of me answering for. I could have left it on the nail. I could have walked out and let the morning come. But I thought if I splice this back in, I can watch it. I can finally watch the 4 seconds. I can do the one thing I have wanted to do since the afternoon on the bench, which is to keep my eyes up while the worst thing happens, to not look down to witness. I thought I owed it to Dana. I thought if I can bear to see what's at 0314, maybe I'll have earned the right to grieve her instead of just failing her over and over in my head. That's a beautiful thought. It's the thought of a man who's been drowning so long he's started to love the water, and I acted on it. I took the ATRIUM reel down to the bay, and I sat at the bench, and I picked up the splicer. And the moment my hands touched it, they knew what to do. That's the part I can't get past. I had never spliced film in my life, but my hands moved like they'd done it 10,000 times. They found the cut on the reel, the clean burned edge where the 4 seconds had been lifted out. They took the coil from the nail, they lined up the frames, and they felt for the sprocket holes without my eyes, and they trimmed and they cemented, and they pressed, smooth, practiced, sure, while I sat there like a passenger in my own body and watched myself rebuild the thing I'd been forbidden to see. And the whole time the smell got stronger, grass and sugar, until it was thick as syrup in that little room. And somewhere out in the dark of the mall, the ticking started. The loose plastic tip of a shoelace, tick, 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 coming down the spine toward the archive, getting closer with every splice my hands made, as if the girl had finally decided to walk the rest of the way out of the screen and into the building to see whether I'd really do it. I did it. The reel was whole. The 4 seconds were back in. I carried it to the deck in the office and I sat down, and the ticking had reached the office door now. Just on the other side of it, tick, tick, patient. And I put the reel in and I pressed play with my hands shaking so hard I had to use both of them. The bright dead mall came up. The fountain. The crowd. The girl in the denim jacket near the right edge now, nearer than I'd ever seen her, her untied shoe, her hair, her back. The time code climbed. 031353, 01355. And at 031356, instead of the static, the footage kept going. Into the 4 seconds nobody was ever supposed to see. And what happened was this. Every person in the atrium turned to face the camera at once. The whole crowd, the shoppers, the kids, the couple, the guard at the pillar. Every single one of them stopped what they were doing and turned, in the same instant, toward me, and looked into the lens, into the office, into the chair where I sat, and their faces were ordinary faces. That was the worst of it. Just people, except that they were all looking at me with the specific, terrible patience of people who have been waiting a very long time for one person to finally arrive. And the girl in the denim jacket began to turn too, her shoulder coming around, her hair starting to swing, the side of her jaw appearing. And from somewhere just outside the frame, from the place at 0314 the footage was sliding toward, the screaming started. Not a scream of fear. I have to be precise about this. It was a scream of recognition. It was the sound a person makes when they see at last, the face they have been screaming about all along. And it was coming, I understood, not from the people on the screen. It was coming from the person who was watching. It was the sound the watcher makes. It was going to be my sound. It was already starting in my own chest, rising, my own throat opening on it, and then everything died. The monitors, the lights, the deck, the heater, all of it, the whole building dropped into black between one frame and the next, and the girl never finished turning, and the scream that was mine cut off in my own throat as if a hand had closed over it, and in the dark and the silence the smell of grass and sugar was gone, and the ticking at the door was gone, and there was nothing but my own heart going like a fist on a locked door. When the emergency lights stuttered back on, I was on the floor. The reel was in the deck, melted, the plastic shell sagging like a candle, though the deck was cold to the touch and had no way to do that. The 4 seconds were gone again, burned out of the world by whatever it is that protects us from arriving at 0314. And on the desk in front of me, in my own handwriting on a strip of masking tape, was the label, ATRIUM the 4, do not run past 4. I had not written it. My hands had not left my sides. But there it was, in my hand, the way the notebook had been in my hand, the way the wet signature had been in my hand, and I finally let myself say the thing I'd been refusing to say for weeks. The handwriting wasn't like mine. It was mine, all of it. Pen's notebook, the labels, the log entries that wouldn't dry. There was no Pen, there was no twin teacher in some other school. There was only me in this room, doing this and forgetting and doing it again. I tried to report it. I want that on the record, too, that I tried. In the morning, I waited for Reyes and I told him everything. The reels, the locker, the editing bay, the 4 seconds, the crowd turning, all of it pouring out of me while he stood there with his tired eyes and his soft voice and his hand on my shoulder. And he listened to the whole thing, and when I was done, he said gently, the gentlest thing anybody had said to me in 3 years, he said, "Marcus, you've told me this before." And I said, No, I just found it, I just watched it last night. And he said, "You tell me every time. You always find the locker. You always splice it back. You always come and tell me in the morning, and I always listen, because it's the least I can do. And then you go home and you sleep, and you come back at 11, and you don't remember, and we start again. We've been doing this a long time, you and me." And I said how long, and he wouldn't say, he just looked at the floor. And I went and I pulled my own timesheets out of the office cabinet, all of them, the whole drawer, and they were thick as a phone book, hundreds and hundreds of pages, the same 2 weeks of dates over and over and over, signed in my hand, Marcus Hale, Marcus Hale, Marcus Hale, 1,000 identical fortnights. And when I called payroll later that day from my truck, shaking, the woman on the phone told me I'd been employed at Orchard Mall for exactly 3 weeks, and that this was my first and only pay period, and was there a problem with my check. So I understand it now as much as a man is allowed to understand it. I'm not haunting the building, and the building isn't haunting me. The two of us are doing a job together. There is something at 0314, in the atrium, in that bright, impossible version of the mall that only exists at the bottom of the tapes. And whatever it is, it screams. And the scream belongs to whoever watches, because the thing at 0314 shows you the face of what you've lost. And the human animal cannot survive seeing that face complete, cannot survive the moment of full recognition, cannot run past 4 and come back whole, and so somebody cuts it. Somebody stands at the splicer in the little room with the bare bulb and removes the 4 seconds every night and hangs the mercy on a nail, and labels the reel "do not run past 4" and burns the evidence and forgets, so that the next man who sits down in that chair, the next grieving fool who can't stop looking, is protected from arriving at the thing that would end him. And the somebody is me. I am the editor. I have always been the editor. We cut it for you. That's what the notebook said. And the we is all the versions of me, all the nights. The whole long line of Marcus Hales standing between each other in 0314, each one sparing the next. And last night I found the uncut reel one more time, the real one. It was in the bin, my crescent thumbnail gouge in the shell, the 4 seconds hanging on the nail, everything reset and waiting. And I carried it down to the bay, and I sat at the bench, and I picked up the splicer, and I could have done it. I could have spliced it whole again and run it and looked finally all the way. Kept my eyes up the way I swore I would, and seen the girl in the denim jacket finish her turn, and learned at last whether she has my daughter's face, whether the thing 0314 was Dana the whole time, whether the gap that ate her 3 years ago and this gap are the same gap, the same 4 seconds wearing different mornings. I wanted that more than I have ever wanted anything. My hands were already moving, the girl's shoe was already ticking down the spine toward me, and I made myself stop. Because I finally understood what I'd never understood about the bench, about the 90 seconds, about looking down. I'd spent 3 years believing that looking away was the worst thing a father could do, that if I had only kept watching I'd have saved her, that my eyes off the screen for 90 seconds was the unforgivable sin. But sitting in that little room with my hands on the splicer and the scream already rising in my chest, I finally felt the other truth. There are things a person is not built to witness whole. There are 4 seconds that if you run all the way into them, take you and don't give you back. And the man who cuts the tape, the man who looks away at a 3:56, isn't a coward and isn't a failure. He's the one doing the only kind thing there is to do. Maybe I looked down on the bench because some part of me already knew. Maybe the looking away wasn't the failure. Maybe it was the last mercy I ever got to give her. And I've been punishing myself for 3 years for an act of love I was too broken to recognize. So I made the cut. I lifted the 4 seconds out, the same 4 seconds, and I hung them back on the nail. and I left the girl forever a quarter turn from showing me her face, and I will never know now. I have chosen never to know whether it was her. I trimmed the leader, and I taped the reel, and I took a fresh strip of masking tape, and I wrote, in my own hand that I no longer pretend is anyone else's, ATRIUM 3 Fort, do not run past 4. And I put it in the bin for the next one of me to find. And the smell of grass and sugar thinned out and was gone, and the ticking at the door stopped. And somewhere in the building, the escalator that never quits gave a little groan and kept on running, carrying nobody up to nothing the way it always has. I'm writing this down for him, for the next Marcus, for the man who will come in at 11 and walk the spine and find a reel with an impossible date and feel his chest go cold with the old hunger. If that's you, if you're reading this in the locker in the back, then listen to me, because I am you and I have done this more times than either of us can count, and I am tired in a way that has no bottom. Do the job. Log it, burn it, sign the line. And if you can't help yourself, if you have to look, the way I always have to look, then look right up to 0313, 56 and not one frame further. Watch the bright dead mall. Watch the fountain run. Watch the girl with the untied shoe walk her slow walk toward the edge. And when the time code reaches the cut, make the cut. Hang the 4 seconds on the nail. Let her stay a quarter turn away from telling you the one thing you'd give your life to know. Because you would. That's the whole trap. You'd give your life to know, and the thing at 0314 is happy to take it. And the only person who's ever stood between you and that price is yourself in the dark, with a splicer in his hands, choosing, one more time, to look away on purpose. We cut it for you. We have always cut it for you. Don't run past 4. Let it be the kindest thing you never did.